question that you want to ask Seth after intermission, which will be question and answer time, text your question to that number. We would like to give a huge shout out to Faith Church for going above and beyond this year to make this event happen. And then we want to welcome Penny Hill and her team from First Step Pregnancy Center in Bangor. So if any of you have migrated down here to this event from Bangor, there is a pregnancy center near you, and she has a booth out in the out by the hub out there. We also want to welcome Maria Pierce from Safe Families of Maine, Janet LeBlanc with Maine Right to Life, and Gabriella Dow with Building Healthy Futures, and our own First Choice Pregnancy Center for getting Seth Gruber here for the second time. So we're so excited to have, we loved him last year. You guys are gonna love him again this year. And so I just wanna introduce him a little bit. Seth Gruber is the West Coast Director of Life Training Institute, an elite team of pro-life speakers that equip and train students, Christian leaders, and the church to be a gracious and persuasive voice for the unborn. He is also the host of this show, Unaborted, with Seth Gruber, a pro-life podcast that translates pro-abortion rhetoric into reality and equips listeners to defend life.
Hang on. Good.
I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted. They would probably prefer to not be dismembered, and we know that because they try to escape the 4 steps that you paid a physician to dismember them with. Is magical personhood conferring fairy dust sprinkled on the child during the 6-inch journey through the birth canal? Does protecting everyone's reproductive rights include unborn women? There are more people working full-time to kill babies than there are working full-time to save them. Planned Parenthood kills more black lives in 2 weeks than the KKK did in a century. So if a rape victim can't murder her rapist who is guilty, why should she be able to murder her unborn child who is just as innocent as she is? The very cowards who insist that pro-lifers shouldn't impose their morality on women seeking abortions are happy to impose their morality on unborn children who can't defend themselves. They assume that the unborn child is not a full human, but they never prove it. Ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have victims.
So without further ado, please help me welcome Seth Gruber.
For Life Radio. We're broadcasting in Southern California, K-Praise 1210 AM and FM 106.1 in North County, and having a great time here with
travel safely. Well, it's good to be here with you guys this evening. I have had a blast out here. I actually came in on Monday night. I flew out from LA, and I got to speak at the Christian High School here, Temple Academy, at Bangor Christian, at Calvary Chapel, Bangor, and now here as well. So I love this state. This is my second time here. Last year, if you were here, that was actually my first time here. And so Wendy and Ron Merrill have shown me a wonderful time. Ron and I have been cruising around the state. We went to the coast today, and I had 2 steamed lobsters all to myself, as well as an appetizer and some Maine blueberry pie. And we're going out for dessert afterwards as well. So anyways, thank you for a warm welcome. It's good to be back. So why are you here? Well, you're here because you're pro-life, right? But so am I. We're all pro-life. You're probably even passionate about your pro-life beliefs, right? Someone else is talking.
What do you think? What do you think the future holds?
We'll give it 1 second. Do you hear that? Okay. Our passion to go to war or fight for life and liberty, while admirable, turns into foolishness if you walk onto the battlefield without any weapons. So this lecture this evening is called The Art of Persuasion, Confronting Abortion with Grace and Truth. So what challenges will you face? What challenges are you already facing? Well, to give you a vignette of the kind of challenges that you're going to face, particularly if you're a young person, as you're getting ready to head off to college, or maybe you're already there, I want to read you a quote from a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado. His name is David Boonin, and he wrote a book called A Defense of Abortion. It's actually one of the best defenses of the pro-choice position. Now, I think it fails quite miserably, but it's one of the best out there. And he wrote in the introduction to his book a story about his son. And I'm going to read you this story in its entirety. It's not too long, because I think this will set the stage for our conversation, as well as the kind of challenges that you're going to face. This is what he says. On my desk in my office, where most of this book was written and revised, there are several pictures of my son Eli. In one, he is gleefully dancing on the sand along the Gulf of Mexico, the cool ocean breeze wreaking havoc with his wispy hair. In a second, he is tentatively seated in the grass in his grandparents' backyard, still working to master the feat of sitting up on his own. In a third, he is only a few weeks old, clinging firmly to the arms that are holding him and still wearing the tiny hat for preserving body heat that he wore home from the hospital. Through all of the remarkable changes that these pictures preserve, he remains unmistakably the same little boy. In the top drawer of my desk, I keep another picture of Eli. This picture was taken 24 weeks before he was born. The sonogram image is murky, but it reveals clearly enough a small head tilted back slightly and an arm raised up and bent, with the hand pointing back toward the face and the thumb extended out toward the mouth. There is no doubt in my mind that this picture, too, shows the same little boy at a very early stage in his physical development. And there is no question that the position I defend in this book entails that it would have been morally permissible to end his life at this point. I'm going to switch to this if that's okay. So what is David Boonin saying? Well, David Boonin is saying that you as pro-lifers are right when you say that the child in the womb at the moment of conception is the same human being that you are now. He grants the pro-lifers' claim that who we are now is who we were in the womb. The only differences between that child in the womb and us now are the same differences between all born people. These are the kind of challenges that you're facing. And our fellow Americans often grant the premise that whatever's in the womb is a human being, but it doesn't matter. And we can kill it anyways. So friends, to make a difference for life, Christians must know two things. We must know what we believe and how to engage strategically. We must know what we believe and how to engage strategically. And this is significant because there are many people like David Boonin who are out there waiting for you to make a mockery of your beliefs, to make a mockery of your faith. And if we're not equipped to engage in the battle for life, we will be defeated. So the takeaway this evening is that you're going to be equipped to create meaningful and effective dialogue with people who may not see this issue the way you do. You will learn valuable strategies on how to keep cool under fire and stay focused on the main thing. I'm going to equip you to ask key questions designed to reverse the burden of proof in conversations on abortion and put you back in the driver's seat of the conversation. What do we believe? How do we engage strategically? So I'm going to give you sort of a review of last year for those of you who weren't here or for those of you who want the reminder from last year. Firstly, what do pro-life ambassadors believe? What do pro-life Christians believe? Well, we as pro-life individuals focus the abortion debate on one question and one question only. And that question is, what is the unborn? And we answer that question scientifically and philosophically. But when people tell you that the abortion debate is a deeply complex issue, and so we shouldn't impose our moral beliefs, and we should leave the issue to women's own conscience, you need only ask them one question to simplify that seemingly complex debate. And that's the question, what is the unborn? Here's a funny little anecdote you can use in conversations on abortion to get your pro-choice friend to admit that the only question that matters is what is the unborn, okay? I want you to imagine that you're standing at your kitchen sink cleaning dishes one evening. And as you're standing there cleaning your dishes, your 3-year-old toddler walks up behind you. Now your back is turned, and you hear your 3-year-old toddler say, "Mommy or Daddy, can I kill this?" Now what would be the first question out of your mouth in response to your toddler's question, "Can I kill this?" What is it? Because if you turn around and he's holding a cockroach, you know, Dad might say, "Here, son, here's a hammer, don't tell Mom." But if you turn around and he was holding the neighbor newborn kitty, I'm hoping you'd have a different reply, unless you're a vindictive cat hater. But if you turn around and he was holding his little brother by the throat, you need counseling, right? So you couldn't answer the question, "Can I kill this?" until you first answered the question, "What is it?" And the same is true on the issue of abortion. We can't honestly answer the question, "Can we kill the unborn?" whatever the unborn is, until we first answer the question, "What is the unborn?" So that simplifies the debate. But what do pro-life Christians believe? Well, we're going to answer that question, and the question, what is the unborn, by turning to science and philosophy. And this is how we make our case for life. And friends, once you understand the case for life, you can make it in a minute or less. And then we'll move on to how we engage strategically. So firstly, let's turn to the science, namely the science of embryology. This is the biology of human beings before they're born. What does the science of embryology teach us? It teaches us that from the moment of conception, from the earliest stages of development, the unborn child is a distinct, living, and whole human being. Distinct, living, and whole. Okay, I have not cherry-picked these terms to make the pro-life position sound more attractive. You will find these terms in any embryology textbook on any university campus. What does distinct mean? Well, it means unique, right? It means separate. It means I'm not you and you're not me. It means that you're a unique individual. There's only one of you, and you'll never exist again. You're distinct. So if that's true of the child in the womb, what does that mean to the abortion debate? Well, it means that the body in her body is not her body, right? And this makes sense, because otherwise we'd have to admit that pregnant women have 20 fingers and 20 toes, 2 brains, 2 hearts, 2 DNA codes, potentially 2 different blood types existing simultaneously. Oh, and if she's pregnant with a boy, now pregnant women have male genitalia. Now, none of this makes sense because we recognize that the unborn child is a distinct human being. Secondly, the unborn child is living. This is quite simple, okay? Dead things don't grow. The unborn child grows. The unborn child meets all of the requirements for a living thing that we learned in high school biology. And lastly, the unborn child develops themselves from within. So pregnant women do not will their unborn children to develop. They do it by themselves. I have an almost 3-year-old and a baby on the way. Here's something my wife never does. She never wakes me up in the middle of the night shaking me saying, "Seth, wake up, wake up. Come whisper to my womb and remind our baby to grow." We don't want her to forget. Why? Because unborn children develop themselves from within. They do it by themselves. So they're distinct, they're living, and they're whole. What does it mean to be a whole human being? Don't confuse wholeness with development. Don't confuse wholeness with functions or capacities that we as human beings will acquire given time. That's not what a whole human being means. It means that you have everything you need to realize your full growth and development as a participating member of the human species. And you had that capacity from the moment you began to exist, the moment of conception. Here's what I mean by this. I'm 29 and I'm not 40. But my wife recently found out that men don't reach their mental peak until their 40s. And she was very encouraged by this. I don't know what to make of that. So anyways. So I haven't realized my full level of development. But does that mean I'm not a whole human being now? No. So similarly, the unborn child hasn't realized their full level of development, but they already have everything they need to do so. So we all find ourselves on a different tick mark on the continuum of human development. But when did that continuum begin? The moment of conception. Here's another example to communicate this idea of wholeness. And this is really the most important aspect of what we learn from the science of embryology. Because the other side will say, well, maybe it's like biologically human. Like maybe it has like human DNA in it, kind of like a skin cell. But it's not a whole human being. It's just kind of like tissue mass. It has human DNA in it. It'll become a human one day. but it's not a whole human being like one of us. So how do we communicate this idea of wholeness? Well, I want you to imagine for a second that you've just won tickets to a safari excursion in Africa, okay? And you get to go with a bunch of your friends and family members. And you get to go out deep into the bush, right? And you get to go see wildlife in its natural habitat. And all of you take your, very updated and new cameras, your iPhones, your DSLRs, your new Canon or Nikon. But one of you likes to kick it kind of old school and brings a Polaroid. Remember those? Now, I actually remember those, but then as all things do, they come back around, and so now they're all cool again, right? Hashtag hipster. So you take your Polaroid camera with you, and as all of your friends and family members are tired because you haven't seen an animal in a while, and they're on Facebook, and they're watching movies on their iPad, you have your eyes glued to the window with your Polaroid camera because at the beginning of the day, that tour guide told you, hey, at the end of the day, we're going to enter a territory where a black jaguar was sighted recently. Now, black jaguars are rarely seen and even more rarely photographed, right? They're a very elusive beast. So you've been very patient and you have kept your face glued to that window. And right after sunset, during those few minutes of twilight, as all of your friends and family members are screwing around, to your luck, you see a black jaguar run out of the bushes, leap across the safari vehicle in front of you, and you capture a picture of him airborne with your Polaroid camera. He lands, he runs into the other way, and you stand up and you start freaking out. And your friends are like, what happened? And you're like, you missed it. Watching movies. Your photo spits out, right, as the Polaroid does. And at that moment, I reach behind your right shoulder, I tear the photo out of your hands, I rip it up into little pieces, and I throw it out the window. Now, some of you are looking at me like I actually did just sin against you, right? Now, as you stare at me with your mouth wide open in blatant horror and anger, what if I stopped you before you cussed me out and said, hey, chill out, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. That was not a picture of a black jaguar. It was actually just a black smudge on a white piece of paper. Now, you would probably respond by saying, Seth, what are you talking about? The jaguar was already there. We just couldn't see him yet. Everything that was necessary for that photo to realize its full development was already present when the photo got spit out. It just needed time. The same is true with the unborn child. From the moment of conception, there's a distinct, living, and whole human being who already has everything they need to realize their full growth and development as a participating member of the human species, even if we can't see him or her yet. They just need time. Does that make sense? That's what it means to be a whole human being. This is what the science teaches us. So what do pro-life ambassadors believe? We believe, according to the science of embryology, that the unborn child is a distinct, living, and whole human being. That's the first way we answer the question, what is the unborn? So you didn't come from an embryo and then become something else. You once were an embryo. Zygote, embryo, fetus, infant, toddler, teenager, adult, grandma and grandpa. All different words that describe the same human being at different stages in their physical development. Unfortunately, proving that the unborn is human and one of us is actually not enough for us to persuade vast swaths of the American public to abandon their pro-choice position, which is ageism, and embrace the pro-life position. Unfortunately, proving that an entire class of beings are humans is not enough to persuade many Americans that they ought to be given human rights. And so at this point, the pro-choice individual, those in your life who disagree with you on abortion, they will pivot and they will make the same argument about the unborn human that racists made about blacks and Nazis made about Jews, primarily by saying, okay, you're right, they're humans, but they're not persons. Now, maybe you as a Christian are thinking, what's the difference? That would be a good question to ask. We would never separate those terms. We would probably use the term human and person synonymously, right? If you're a human, you're a person, whatever, it's the same thing, dude. But the practitioners of genocide have always separated the term human from person in order to dehumanize an entire class of human beings so they can make it more intellectually tenable to mistreat that class of human beings or to exterminate them. This bigotry was so full-fledged at different times in human history that our own Supreme Court said that blacks were not persons. That the Hiesgericht, the German Supreme Court, said that Jews were not persons, with none of the rights therein. And of course, in 1973, our United States Supreme Court did the same thing that it did to our African American brothers and sisters, to our preborn children. They're not persons and have no rights through point of birth. So, we then have to make an argument for the equal value of the unborn child. We have to say, okay, it's a human, but it's also a person. It has the same rights as all of us who are already born. And those rights demand that our government protect those rights and restore personhood to those children. So how do we make this case? We've already proven it's a human. How do we prove that it has the same rights? Well, we turn to philosophy, right? Philosophy deals with questions of ultimate concern, with first principles. We're going to make the case for the equal value of the unborn child from human equality. Isn't it funny, by the way, that the pro-choice left, or the pro-choice movement, couches their language and their rhetoric in the words of equality and rights, right? Women's rights, women's equality. The idea is that they don't believe women can be truly equal with men unless they have the legal right to kill their own unborn children. Very well, let's use the language of equality and rights to illustrate that the unborn child is an equal bearer of rights. And here's our argument. It goes like this. There is no value-giving difference between the embryonic human being that you once were and the adult that you are today that would justify killing you at that earlier stage. I'll shorten the sentence. There's no value-giving difference between you, the unborn human, and you, the born human, that would make it okay to kill you, the unborn human. Does that make sense? Now, does that mean that there are no differences between unborn humans and born humans? Of course not, right? If we held up a 16-week photo of you in the womb and put it up next to your face today, I bet there'd be some differences. The pro-lifers' case is not that there are no differences between fetuses and teenagers. Our case is that none of those differences are relevant to the question of human equality. None of those differences are relevant to the question, can we kill you in the womb? But there are differences, and they're summarized in the acronym SLED, S-L-E-D. Now, this is a very difficult concept for me because I'm from Southern California and I can't even spell the word snow, but work with me. SLED, S-L-E-D. These differences stand for size, level of development, environment, and dependency. And these are the only 4 differences between unborn people and born people. Now, what I want you to notice as we go through these is that, guess what? The unborn child differs from us in the same ways that we differ from one another. So if the pro-choicer accepts these differences as adequate justifications to kill the unborn, why not use them to justify killing born people? So they say the unborn child is smaller. Oh, you mean that thing at 3 weeks that you can't even see? And that the mother doesn't even know she's pregnant with yet? Wow, you really are a Christian rube to think that that has any human equality with the mother. You can't even see it yet. But since when has size grounded our rights as human beings? If we already know the unborn is a human being, and I know you're a human being, but I'm 6'3", then all of you under 6'3" have a lesser degree of personhood and therefore a lesser right to life. No. Because human rights has nothing to do with size. It has everything to do with who we are. Human beings with a human nature. When did that begin? The moment of conception. So if it would be wrong for me to kill you for being smaller than me, it's equally wrong to kill unborn children for being smaller than us. What about level of development? Sure, the unborn child is less developed than the newborn child, but newborn children are less developed than toddlers, and toddlers are less developed than teenagers. Your parents are more developed than you, and your grandparents are more developed than your parents. Does that mean that grandparents can kill their grandchildren? Because grandparents are more developed. Right? There's some grandparents right here with their grandchildren. I think they'd be saying, no, please. Why? Because level of development has no relevancy to human rights or value. But what does the pro-choicer say about the child in the womb? It can't feel pain. It's not viable. It's not aware of its own existence. But what is necessary for a human being in the womb to possess and realize those capacities? A level of development. So if it would be wrong for me to kill you for being less developed than me, it's equally wrong to kill unborn children for being less developed than us. Why? Because we have one thing in common, and it's the only thing all human beings have in common: a human nature. And that began at the moment of conception. The third difference is environment or location. Yes, the unborn child is located in a very unique environment, his or her mother's womb. By the way, we're all former womb dwellers. That's where we all came from. We're all unaborted human beings. Our mothers made the right choice. And as Ronald Reagan hilariously pointed out, I've noticed everyone who's for abortion has already been born. How ironic. You stump for the slaughter of children in a womb you were once in and were protected in, by the way. Friends, did you know that the most dangerous place for a human being to find themselves in America in 2020 is a womb? You're more likely of being murdered as a human in a womb than residing or living in any dangerous city or crime-ridden slum. And it was created to be the environment and location that you were protected in and valued. How do I know this? Because many women who get cancer while they're pregnant will still go through chemotherapy, and in the vast majority of cases, that child is born perfectly fine and flawless, unaffected by the chemo. Why? Because the womb was created to protect you. And where one is has no bearing on who one is. But according to American law on abortion, you can kill a child in the womb through all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason or no reason at all because it's in the womb. It's 6 inches away. It's obviously not a person. But apparently during childbirth, the fetus fairy flies up and sprinkles magical personhood conferring fairy dust on the child as it exits the birth canal. Because once that child is born, American law says a person, a citizen with rights protected under the Constitution. What? It moves 6 inches. So 6 inches before and 60 seconds before, it was obviously not a person with rights and merely the property of its mother. But now it's a bearer of rights because it moves 6 inches? Do you think I'm stupid? Well, yes, that's exactly what pro-choicers think you are. And that's why I want you equipped to engage the culture, because people like David Boonin are ready and waiting for you. Environment clearly has no relevancy to your rights or value as a human being, because where one is has no bearing on who one is. What about dependency or degree of dependency? This means how dependent you are on someone or something else for your life. Yes, it's true the unborn child is very dependent on the mother, right? And in the first trimester and early second trimester, that unborn child cannot survive apart from their dependency on their mother. But by the way, because of medical and scientific advancements, we're moving back the line at which we can make unborn children not dependent on their mothers. By the way, anyone want to take a guess at the earliest child born in America who survived and went home and is now thriving? 21. Close. And that child was born at the end of 2019 and went home just recently. And what's a full-term baby? 40 weeks. So we've almost cut it in half. Incredible. And yet you will read horrific, tragic stories still around the country. They happen every few months. I see the stories where a child or twins is born at 22, 23, or 24 weeks, and the doctor, who views himself as some type of modern god, will stand in that hospital room and go, well, my definition and understanding of viability is at 26 weeks, so I'm sorry, your child's not a person and we're not going to intervene to save it. I read these stories about every 3 months, while the parents sit there crying and begging the physician to try to save their preemies. But no, see, these physicians get to decide who lives and who dies. Meanwhile, President Trump at the beginning of 2020 highlighted baby Ellie and her mother in his State of the Union address, who until recently was the youngest child who was born and survived at 21 weeks and 6 days. And there Ellie's mom was holding 2-year-old Ellie, who's perfectly healthy. Born at St. Luke's Hospital in Kansas City, who has invested a lot of money and talent to saving children at earlier stages. So babies born at 22 weeks at St. Luke's Hospital have a 50% survival chance, while the nationwide average is about 12. What does that mean? It means that we can do it. It means we have the ability if we put the talent and the money into doing so. But many pro-choicers say, well, I'm against abortion once the child can survive outside the womb. You see where this is going? Sorry, I just want to let you know, 10 years ago, that would have been 30 weeks, 32 weeks. Today, that's 21 weeks. So question, pro-choice friend, does the personhood and right to life of the child arbitrarily change based off of subjective advancements in science? Because you said it's wrong to kill them once they can survive outside the womb. But they're able to survive outside the womb at earlier and earlier stages every 2 years. So are you saying that a fundamental right to life actually constantly shifts and changes based off of external medical advancements? Huh, what a weird world. Because our right to life has no bearing on our dependency. That's why it's weird. That's why we should be scratching our head. By the way, does that child's dependency stop after birth? What happens if you leave an infant in a crib and do nothing? Oh yeah, they die and you're charged with infanticide. But what if the mom said, my breast, my choice, my body, my choice? They're dependent on me for breast milk, therefore bodily autonomy, hashtag reproductive justice. Would that argument hold up in a court of law? No. So if we can kill unborn children merely because they're dependent on their mothers, can we kill born people who are dependent on heart pacemakers, caretakers, insulin, life support? They're also dependent on someone or something else without which they cannot continue to live. Anyone want to get on board with killing those people? What a tragedy, huh? That in America today, rather than saying, the more dependent you are and in need of help, the greater obligation I have to give it to you. No, instead we say, it's actually the child's need for help that justifies their dismemberment. What an upside down world. What did Mother Teresa once say? Society will be judged by how they treat the least of these. So these are the only 4 differences between unborn people and born people. Size, level of development, environment, and dependency. So notice, I've just made a case for life, for the humanity from science, and the equal value from philosophy of the unborn child. And have I cited Bible verses to make my case? No. But am I communicating biblical truth nonetheless? Yes, the biblical truth that you are an intrinsically valuable human being from the moment of conception because you're an image bearer of God. That's what pro-lifers believe. That's how we articulate our case for life. And once you know it, you can make it in a minute or less. You ready? You can time me if you want. According to the science of embryology, pro-lifers argue that the unborn child is a distinct, living, and whole human being. Philosophically, we argue that there's no value-giving difference between the embryo you once were and the adult you are today that would justify killing you at that earlier stage. Differences in size, level of development, environment, and dependency are not good reasons for saying you had no right to life in the womb, oh, but you do now. There's your case for life. So if you're going to be equipped to engage the culture for life, we have to be clear on these questions. What do pro-life ambassadors believe, and how do we engage strategically? Friends, too many pro-lifers assume the burden of proof in discussions on abortion when they shouldn't. Here's what I mean by that. If I claim that there's a pink dinosaur hanging on the wall up there beneath the speaker, oh, one of you looked, it would be up to me to prove it, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be up to you to go, no, Seth, there's not. Let me prove to you there's not a pink dinosaur there. You would not bear the burden of proof to prove me wrong, right? I would bear the burden of proof to prove it was there. Why? I made the claim. I bear the burden of proof. The same thing happens in the issue of abortion. Too many times when we're under fire on conversations on abortion, we begin to adopt the burden of proof to prove to the pro-choice individual that the unborn is human. It does have equal rights. But they're the one typically who makes the claim that it's okay to kill what's ever in the womb. Well, you better prove that thing's not a human. You better prove it doesn't have rights. So firstly, I want you to be aware of the fact that oftentimes in conversations on abortion, it will be your pro-choice friend who bears the burden of proof because they're often the one speaking up saying, abortion is women's rights. Merely ask them questions about what they believe. And so when you're under fire, there are questions you can ask to get back in the driver's seat of the conversation. And the goal of these questions is not dominance, it's clarity, right? We believe as pro-life Christians that we have truth, not because there's anything special about us, rather because God has illumined our hearts with the truth, right? And we know that he is objective truth. Bible actually says that Jesus is reality. Jesus himself is objective reality. And so we understand we have the truth. So the goal of these questions we're going to go through is not to own the libs. It's to seek clarity and hopefully to bring your friend along with you in the journey towards truth. We have compassions for those in our lives who are pro-choice because they have embraced bad ideas and they have become the victims of those ideas. Either the victims because they chose abortion, or the victims because now they're completely apathetic to the genocide of baby image bearers, or oftentimes they're defending that genocide. That's why we want to change the minds of those in our lives. So I'm going to give you 3 questions that you can use as a sort of map in conversations on abortion to apply what pro-lifers believe, to apply what we just went through, and hopefully draw out what your friend believes to show them that these ideas are dangerous and ought to be abandoned. The first question is, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And this question is very important because you just learn a lot. It gives you a lot of information rather than your friend saying, well, I believe abortion is women's rights. And we go, no, it's not. It's not unborn women's rights. What about their rights? I mean, that is a good answer, but it's probably going to turn them off. So instead, ask questions about what they believe. By the way, who likes talking about themselves? Most of us. So it dignifies the other person because it shows that you want to learn more about them. You want to learn more about what they believe. And by the way, ask these in a nice way, okay? Don't go, what do you mean by that? Ask it in a nice way. Show interest in the other person. It dignifies them. And in return, you get a bunch of information about what they actually believe. So what? So you're positioned to respond better to their beliefs and to this conversation on abortion. Here's a personal example of how I've used this before. I was speaking at a rather large Catholic high school in Long Beach, California. All female high school, by the way, all girls. And many babies that are murdered are males. But again, that's not going to be a message they're going to hear from me, right? So I had to go into the lines then, right? Well, we did Q&A afterwards, right? Which I love to do with audiences. And this woman stood up, and you could hear that she was trying to keep herself from yelling at me. She was very upset with me. And she said, I'm not for abortion. I'm for the choice of women. I'm for the choice of the woman. And I very graciously asked, what choice? Now, keep in mind, I had already shown abortion imagery and made my case for life. And I said, what choice? And she said, abortion. And I said, and what is an abortion? And through a Freudian slip, she said, killing a baby. Oops. The great conservative consolation is that reality always reasserts itself in the end, because reality tends to be self-evident. And so even those who suppress it for decades can't help but sometimes have reality creep back up and slap them in the face. And when that happens, whether it's us or our friends, we would do well to turn the other cheek and come back to reality. So reality slipped, and she said, killing a baby. And I said, can I repeat back to you what you just told me? According to you, you're not for abortion. You're just for the choice of women to kill babies. That is being for abortion. And I reminded her that this was the same thing many racists said about slavery. They argued they weren't for slavery, they were for the choice of plantation owners to purchase human beings. They were, as Stephen Douglas said, for the right of each state to determine whether they would purchase and whip human beings. And I said, that's not a tolerant position. Because in relegating slavery to the realm of neutral, you were actually relegating it to the realm of acceptable. And she admitted that abortion kills a baby. But what did I ask? I asked questions about what she meant by that. What do you mean by choice? What do you mean by abortion, right? So the what do you mean by that question is used to get more information. So you don't always have to word it, by the way, verbatim, what do you mean by that? It could be, tell me more about that. What do you mean by abortion? How do you understand the word this or the concept this, right? So you can word this question however you want. The purpose is to get more information about what they believe. You're asking questions about them. Okay, here's some more examples of how this kind of plays out in conversations on abortion or other conversations on truth and morality, okay? Maybe you've heard people say something like, well, pro-lifers force their views on others. And they shouldn't do that, right? We shouldn't force our opinions or our morals on others. A good question would be, really, how so? It's so simple, right? Instead of us trying to prove, no, we don't. How so? How do we force our views on others? How about this one? Embryos are just a mass of cells. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by a mass of cells? And then they're going to tell you more about what they mean by that, right? Well, it's not a person, it's just a bunch of tissue, right? And then you could probably say, right, this could lead you to say things like, well, did you know, according to the science of embryology, it's actually a whole human being, and they have everything they need to realize their full growth and development. But you won't always be able to respond as effectively and hopefully move their dial from pro-choice to more in the middle or pro-life if you don't ask them about what they believe. I have a right to choose, right? This is what she said. Choose what exactly? Abortion is health care. What do you mean by health care? And then they're going to tell you that in order for women to have equality, they need to have health care, and that includes an abortion, right? Well, what about the health of the child? Women have a fundamental right to an abortion. What do you mean by fundamental? And where does this fundamental right come from? So these are examples in the abortion debate about how you can use the question, what do you mean by that, to get more information. Here's the second question. How did you come to that conclusion? How did you come to that conclusion, or why do you believe that? Why do you believe that? So where the first question was used in order to get more information, the second question is used to reverse the burden of proof, get you out of the hot seat, and force your critic to provide evidence and proof for their claims. They made the claim, right? So you're going to ask questions to force them to defend the statement they made or the belief that they hold. Here's a real-life example. A friend of mine by the name of Jojo Ruba, he's a pro-life speaker and Christian apologist in Canada. And several years ago, he was doing a pro-life display with graphic imagery of abortion on a university campus in Canada. And a professor came out with his entire class to go see the display and really, to engage in nasty ad hominem dialogue with the pro-lifers out there. So this professor comes out, and he looks at my friend Jojo, and he says, "Those pictures are fake. Those are fake abortion photos. Those aren't real." Now, I've been at many of these displays, and I've been told the same thing over and over again. So we bring out the signed documents from where we got them to say, oh, really, here's this. So anyway, so he says, "Those abortion photos are fake." And Jojo said, "What do you mean by that?" He then asked, "Tell me, what do real abortion pictures look like? If those are fake, what do real ones look like?" The professor was silent. Stood there completely dumbfounded and didn't have an answer. Now, instead of Jojo saying, "No, they are, trust me," and assuming the burden of proof, he put the burden of proof back on the professor by saying, "Well, you seem very informed about abortion photos. I mean, such that you could actually call those fake. So what do real ones look like?" Had no answer, right? So this is an example of what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And you're putting the burden of proof back on the person who made the claim. Here's some more examples on the issue of abortion or on other moral debates. Someone says, well, no one can say which beliefs are right or wrong, right? Moral relativism. There is no objective truth. No one can say what's right or wrong. Then why believe you? Wouldn't you have to have access to truth to say that? You just told me no one can say they're right or wrong. Then why should I listen to you? Including that statement? So you're putting the burden of proof back on them. How about this one? No one religion or person sees the whole truth. More relativism, right? Well, how do you know that each religion or person can't see the whole truth or can see only part of the truth unless you could see the whole truth, which is something you just said was impossible? How about this one? Thousands of women die from illegal abortions every year. Well, prior to 1973, thousands of women died from illegal abortions. I can't believe you would want to make abortion illegal again, pro-lifer. How do you know that? Most people can't answer that question, by the way. And I can provide the evidence of former abortionists who turned pro-life and then later admitted that we were fibbing and making up lies about how many women were dying from illegal abortions prior to 1973, and we did it to create cultural hysteria. Now, are they going to be able to cite him? No, of course not. They're just saying that because they heard it somewhere. So put the burden of proof back on them. How about this one? Fetuses are not self-aware. And of course, their assumption is so therefore they have no rights. Why is self-awareness a value-giving trait? You're assuming that self-awareness gives one's rights. Why do you need self-awareness to have value? Put the question back on them. They made the claim. Pro-lifers are just trying to legislate their religious views. Do you believe that a religious view which says it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings is wrong? Who cares if it's informed by religion? If it says that it's always wrong to intentionally kill innocent people, what's wrong with that? But they're just using the category of religion to attack you as some type of dogmatist. How about this one? We need abortion because women who are raped shouldn't be forced to give birth. We need abortion because women who are raped shouldn't be forced to give birth. Do you think it's okay to kill toddlers for the crimes of their father? Well, no, that's different, pro-lifer. And now they have to defend their beliefs. See? So this is the second question. How did you come to that conclusion? Why do you believe that? Or phrase it whatever way you want that forces them to defend their belief, their premise, their conclusion that they have already stated. Here's the third question. Have you ever considered the implications for your view? Again, these are just sort of fill-in questions. You can phrase them however you want. Have you ever considered, and then you fill in, this is where your ideas would lead, right? This is the idea philosophically called reductio ad absurdum. It's where you take your opponent's argument and you go, let's carry it to its intellectual conclusion, to its consistent conclusion. Let's just see where these ideas lead, shall we? Oh, that's a bad idea. That's reductio ad absurdum. And that's how you frame this question. Have you considered that based off of what you just told me, it would justify this or it would lead to this? Here's some examples. Oh, and by the way, the purpose of this question is to show that your critic must pay too high a price to continue holding his view. By showing him where his ideas lead, hopefully if he's intellectually honest, he'll go, ooh, I don't like that. Force your critic to show they must pay too high a price to continue holding their view. And you know who was the best at this, by the way? Abraham Lincoln, that great presidential abolitionist, right? Abraham Lincoln participated in these very famous debates with Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas ran for president as the Democratic Party's nominee against Lincoln in 1860. He failed. Now, Stephen Douglas had this idea that he was personally opposed to slavery, but he supported the right of each state to vote it up or down. Ever heard that? I'm personally pro-life. I would never kill a baby, but I think it should be legal to kill babies. I wouldn't tell someone else they shouldn't do that. Same thing. That was Stephen Douglas' position on slavery. And him and Abraham Lincoln did these debates, presidential debates. And by the way, they went like 3 or 4 hours, right? You thought it was hard to sit through the other one the other night? But by the way, listening to them is like a treat, right? I mean, just beautiful rhetoric, very well spoken, incredible. We've fallen a long ways from our political discourse, let me tell you. So they went all across the country doing these, right? 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. People would come out in the tens of thousands to hear them in person. Well, Abraham Lincoln, several years before that, was preparing himself, as you are now, to engage on the ideological field of bigotry. It was slavery for him, it's abortion for you. He was equipping himself with the tools he needed to defend the position that all human beings are created equal, regardless of their skin color. He was preparing to debate pro-slavery people. And he wrote down in this little piece of paper that we have photocopies of, a piece called Fragments on Slavery. And I'm going to show you how adept Lincoln was at this form of questioning, of saying, have you considered the implications of your view? This is what he wrote. You say A is white and B is black. It is color then. The lighter having the right to enslave the darker? Take care, by this rule, you are to be a slave to the first man you meet with a fairer skin than your own. Oh, you do not mean color exactly, right? Just like pro-choice, as soon as you debunk their position, they go, okay, then abortion should be legal for this reason. Slavery supporters did the same thing. Lincoln would just own them, and they'd go to another argument for slavery. So he goes, okay, you do not mean color exactly. You mean that whites are intellectually the superiors of blacks and therefore have the right to enslave them? Take care again. By this rule, you are to be a slave to the first man you meet with an intellect superior to your own. But you say it is a question of interest. And if you can make it your interest, you have the right to enslave another. Very well. And if he can make it his interest, he has the right to enslave you. What was Lincoln pointing out? He was pointing out that the argument to enslave blacks could not be confined to blacks. That those arguments worked equally well to enslave whites. Because Southern states were basing personhood and rights on capacities and functions that come in varying degrees. What came in varying degrees? Well, skin color comes in varying degrees, intellect comes in varying degrees, and interest or desires comes in varying degrees. But if you just said that personhood and rights are based on things that come in varying degrees, it would follow that personhood and rights come in varying degrees. And now we're left with a world that Darwin would be very happy with. Might makes right. So look what Lincoln did with pro-slavery arguments. You say this, have you considered that it would lead to this, namely your own enslavement? So he was pointing out that Southern states were blindly putting into place the premises that would justify their own enslavement. The same is true with abortion today. Why? Because the arguments used to justify the taking of unborn human life work equally well to justify killing people outside the womb. That's the best historical example I can give you of someone who knew how to engage in the Socratic method of asking questions and asking very good ones to get at the truth without demeaning his opponents, because he had compassion for the bad ideas that they had become victims of. Right? With malice toward none. We should engage in the same way. Here's more examples. You shouldn't judge. Have you considered that you just did? Don't judge me. Well, you're judging me. You're telling me not to do something. Fetuses have no right to life because they're not self-aware. Have you considered that newborns are not self-aware either? Right? So I'm phrasing it in different words, right? But I'm phrasing it in such a way that says, look at where your ideas lead. Make your critic pay too high a price to continue holding their position. Fetuses have no desire to go on living. Have you considered what follows from that? Did you know that the capacity to desire something doesn't occur until several weeks after birth? So can we kill newborns? Pro-lifers should stop telling women how to live. Isn't telling someone not to do something telling them how to live? Make your critic pay too high a price to continue holding their beliefs. What do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? Or why do you believe that? And have you considered the consequences of your position, right? Have you considered the implications of your view? So how do we put this all together? Well, I'm going to give you a few sort of conversations on abortion between myself and myself. And I'm going to go through each of those questions. And then when I'm done, if anyone feels brave enough, I'm going to let someone volunteer to come up and role play a conversation on abortion with me. Don't worry, I will play the pro-choicer so that you can practice being who you are naturally, the pro-life individual. So, embryos have no desire to go on living. They don't have any desires, right? So therefore they have no right to life. What do you mean by desire? Do you mean one that I'm consciously aware of? Do I have to be conscious of that desire? Next question. Why must I have a conscious desire for something before I can lay claim to it? In other words, why are conscious desires value-giving in the first place? What is it about having conscious desires that grants rights? The pro-choicer is assuming that conscious desires grants rights, but they've never proven it. And the third question, have you considered that a slave can be conditioned to not desire his freedom? Does that mean that we have not violated his rights? Of course not. And what if my desire to live is greater than yours? Does that mean I have a greater right to life? So there is all three questions on one sort of conversation on abortion. Here's another, and you're very familiar with this one. The Bible is silent on abortion, so we should be too. The Bible is silent on abortion, therefore abortion is okay. The Bible actually condones it, or it's neutral on it. By the way, in my podcast, Unaborted with Seth Gruber, I have an entire episode called Can Someone Be Christian and Pro-Choice / Refuting the Theological Case for Abortion. And I go through all of the arguments that Christians use from the Bible to justify abortion and debunk them entirely. So that episode is available for you if you want to learn more about this here. But the Bible is silent on abortion, therefore abortion is okay. Well, what do you mean by silent? Do you mean that the word is not mentioned directly? Or that we can't draw any conclusions from the Bible? Are you saying that whatever the Bible doesn't expressly condemn, it condones? But if not, then what's your point? If you don't believe that the Bible's silence condones behaviors that it's silent on, then why are you bringing that up in the first place on abortion? Second question, do you think the biblical authors don't mention abortion by name? Why do you think they don't? And what are your reasons for thinking their silence justifies abortion? They just assume that silence equals complicity or neutrality. And lastly, have you considered the consequences of have you considered the Bible doesn't condemn many behaviors, but we can still know that they're wrong? Namely, forced female circumcision and lynching homosexuals and drive-by shootings. The Bible doesn't condemn any of those behaviors. I guess they're okay, right? Ridiculous. Because we would say as Christians, the Bible provides the theological foundation necessary for us to develop spiritual clarity on those questions. And if so, the same would be true with the issue of abortion. So that's another conversation. Here's another one. Laws can't stop all abortions. You heard that one? Women are going to get them anyways. So keep them legal. That's the argument, right? Well, do you mean all or most? Do you mean it can't stop all of them, or it won't stop most of them? And how do you know most women won't obey the law? How do you know that? You're just assuming because the law can't stop abortion that if it's made illegal, all the same numbers of women will get them anyways. Before abortion was legalized in 1973, it's estimated there was about 98,000 abortions a year, illegal ones. Want to know how many happened in 1973 and 1974 after it was made illegal? 1.7 million a year. Clearly, the law affected behavior. So, and then the third question, and that would be, have you considered that laws against rape don't stop all rape, but they do stop most, right? Have you considered that if you say the law can't stop all abortions, well, the law can't stop all types of things, but that doesn't mean it's misguided to pass laws against them. And they would never say, guess we should make rape legal because it's not stopping all forms of rape. Ridiculous. Here's a last sort of conversation. Women have the right to do what they want with their bodies, right? The most popular one. What do you mean by right? And what do you mean by body? Force them to tell you whose body that they're thinking of, because we as pro-lifers, we acknowledge two. They acknowledge one. Do women have complete bodily autonomy? Can they do whatever they want? Would you defend a woman using her body in a way that wounded others? They'd probably say no. Well, that's exactly what she's doing when she gets an abortion. And lastly, have you considered that the government regularly prevents people from exercising bodily autonomy? This is why we have laws against rape and drunk driving and streaking. You can't always use your body however you want. And in the course of exercising your bodily autonomy in an abortion, an innocent human being is dismembered or poisoned to death. We don't have complete bodily autonomy. Have you considered that? Okay, so those are how we kind of can put all those together on at least several conversations on abortion. So pro-life individuals, to be equipped to engage the culture, must be clear on what we believe and how to engage strategically on the battlefield of abortion. And that's how we can do that. Now, we're going to do some hands-on practice. And if you are brave enough, and if you want to, you can raise your hand and you can come up here. And if we have another mic, we will get that for you, or maybe I'll just use this one. And we'll role play a conversation on abortion. I'll be the pro-choicer, you'll be the pro-lifer. Now, anyone have enough caffeine in their system to raise their hand and be brave? Anyone want to come down? This is probably the most safest place you'll be. Yep, awesome. If you can't do it here, I mean, Alrighty, what's your name, brother? Dan? Awesome, good to meet you, Dan. Here, I'm gonna go back to mine if that works.
I could use that. No.
Don't worry about it. Alrighty, Dan, so, do you have any friends who are
Can I
pro-choice?
sit down?
You can sit with me.
All right.
Do you have any friends that are pro-choice? Have you ever gotten into intense conversations on abortion?
Pretty regularly.
Pretty regularly. Okay, good, awesome. So then maybe you'll be a little bit more rehearsed than many. So this will be good. Okay, so I don't know what arguments I'm going to throw at you yet. I'm just going to go for it.
Sure.
But we're gonna practice civility. So assume that I'm a nice pro-choicer, right? I'm not gonna participate in ad hominem attacks. Okay, I'm not gonna call him a religious bigot or anything like that. Okay. So I'm Seth, the pro-choicer. We work together. So Dan, I understand you're voting for Trump because he's pro-life. That's ridiculous. He's not pro all lives. What about the lives of the children at the border who he's throwing in cages and tearing out of the arms of mothers? How is that pro-life?
Right. He didn't condemn white supremacy either. You're right. No. I was just going with that soundbite. Let's see. Well,
How can you say you're pro-life, but then turn a blind eye to children at the border who are being thrown in cages? What about universal health care? Do their lives not matter? Some people need help.
well, Trump isn't the ultimate example I'm going with. He's standing on a platform.
So you're starting to you're putting the burden of proof on yourself, right? So this is good, right? So you started telling me why I was wrong, right?
Yep.
Or why you were right.
Yep.
But I'm the one coming at you. I'm the one telling you that you're not really pro-life because you're not for the lives of other lives who I'm arguing are being victimized by injustice, right? So what would you ask me?
Can you explain that? What do you mean by that?
By what?
The fact of Trump, stating that. I'm sorry. I haven't had enough coffee.
No, it's all good. So I'll give you a hint, okay?
Yeah.
I have assumed a definition of pro-life that is not what yours is. Because the pro-life position is that it's always wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings without proper justification. Now, whether we put people in large caged enclosures, which aren't the Marriott, but they're not prisons, that's a debate we can have. But that has no bearing on my position that it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings without proper justification. It's one thing to deny someone illegal entry to our country. It's another to dismember them once they cross the border, right?
Good point.
So it's not the same issue as abortion, but I'm conflating it, right? And I'm trying to make you look like you're not really pro-life
Or smart.
because you're voting for someone who tears children out of the arms of their parents, right? So it's tempting to say, well, no, a lot of those parents aren't their parents, and sometimes they traffic children across, and so that's why ICE is justified in doing that. But then you'd be assuming the burden of proof. I made the claim.
Going
so
into the weeds.
a good question might be something like, well, Seth, what do you mean by pro-life?
All right. Seth,
Right.
Seth, what do you mean by pro-life?
Well, your position says pro-life. It doesn't say pro-unborn lives. It says pro-life. I thought you were pro-all lives. I thought that's why the word life was in there.
My environment is changing my.
Yeah. No, it's all good. Yeah, and so
argument.
this is why this type of practice is so good, right?
Yeah, well, I was like, geez, I'm going to do this with him online. I'm like, well, I might as well do it up here.
Yeah. So you've asked me a question about myself. That's good. And now you can move to any of the other questions, right? So what do you mean by that, and what was the second?
My phone's over there.
Why do you
I was
believe
taking
that?
notes.
Why do you believe that, or how have you reached that conclusion? So you might ask me something like, after I've given you my definition of pro-life, right? You might say something, oh, well, now you have a lot of information about my definition of pro-life, namely that it's not yours.
Okay.
Namely that you wouldn't say that you're not really pro-life unless you were also saying that people who enter our country illegally shouldn't be temporarily put in large caged enclosures to make sure they're not being trafficked by their parents. And we would recognize that that's not the same as saying don't kill babies in the womb. Right. So now you know my definition of pro-life. Now you might ask me a little bit about that second question. How did you come to embrace that pro-life, that definition of pro-life, right? Why do you believe that being opposed to abortion, which is what pro-life means, also requires you to support or to oppose putting people in temporarily caged enclosures, right? And then you might go something like, well, have you considered that those two things are not the same? Have you considered that the reason pro-lifers are opposed to abortion is because it intentionally kills an innocent human being without proper justification? Hey, and I'd love to have a great conversation with you about the issues going on at the southern border. maybe there's ways we can improve them, right? We do want to care for those children, but we're not rounding up and killing them. We're not ripping them limb from limb after they cross the border. Maybe there's something to be improved there. But that's not the same as killing innocent human beings in the womb. Have you considered that, right? So then you're telling me now, that third question, but you're telling me a little bit more about your position, right? Or maybe why I should consider your position. So those would be maybe some ways you can go about it. Does that help?
Yeah. Definitely
awesome.
through failure. I learned.
Yeah. Do you want to go around two?
I think I'll let.
Alrighty. Thank you. Give him a round of applause. All right, we have time for maybe one or two more if anyone else wants to go. Does anyone else want to try? I'll do an easier pro-choice argument, okay? Anyone at all? All right, I'll give you guys 10 seconds if anyone wants to show bravery, and then we'll move on, okay? You guys heard me twice. Yes, come on up. Let's do it. Give him a round of applause. What's your name, brother? Brandon. All right, good to meet you. All right, here, you want to go over here? Here you go. All right, Brandon, so same gig, all right?
Yes.
So are you in high school?
I graduated.
You graduated, awesome.
Yes.
You going to school right now?
No, I'm working right now. I'm going to be going to school soon.
Awesome, good for you. Where do you work?
I work at S.J. Rollins in Brewer.
Okay, cool. So we work together, right? I'm pro-choice. We're friendly, but you've kind of been pissing me off recently because you wore a Trump mask into work.
It was the only one I had.
And sorry, what was your name again?
Brandon.
Brandon. So, Brandon, you say you're pro-life, right? In fact, I think I saw you tweet something out the other day. You said pro-life is pro-woman. So, how can you be pro-life and pro-woman while denying women their fundamental right to an abortion? What about their women's rights?
Well,
What do you mean by?
yeah, I would ask you, what do you mean by that? What makes you think that's what I do?
Well, you tweeted it. You said pro-life is pro-woman. So what about a woman's fundamental natural right to an abortion?
Just give me a sec. Just give me a second.
So you might start with, what do you mean by a fundamental right? Or what do you mean by abortion? Because the pro-choicer will always have a vastly different definition in their mind of what an abortion means, right? The pro-lifer will be thinking genocide, human dismemberment, but I'm thinking feminism, women's equality, right? So how can you deny women their fundamental right to an abortion? What would you ask me?
What do you mean by fundamental right?
I mean that if women are going to be equal with men, they need to have abortions. You don't have a womb, right? You're not going to be prevented from career success through pregnancy, but maybe she is. So for her to be equal to you, she needs to have an abortion. That's a fundamental right.
If, in that case, if men and women were truly to be equal, then shouldn't theoretically men have that right too? But in which case they can't, because you just said yourself that men can't have an abortion. But if we were to be equal with them, then we have to have that right
Women
too.
have it in virtue of their femininity. Men can't have that because they're men.
You do know that there's feminine men in the world, right?
Oh no, I'm an old school liberal. Yeah. So I believe there's only two sexes.
So just because you are that means that there's no feminine men in the world. That's what you're saying.
Well, how they manifest their masculinity or lack thereof has nothing to do with their actual biological sex. So that's why it's in virtue of being a woman to have a right to an abortion. Right, so that's good. So if you started with, what do I mean by fundamental right, right? And I told you. Now, maybe a good next move here would be to say, we understand fundamental rights to be rights that we have in virtue of our humanity, right? That's why they're fundamental, right? They're natural rights. You're probably familiar with the idea of natural law, right? The laws of nature and nature's God, as our founding documents say. So if fundamental or natural rights come from our humanity, then we have them from the moment we're what?
Conceit.
Human, right? And that would be at the moment of conception, right? So a very sort of pithy next move might be to ask me to consider, right, whether I support all women's equality, right? Or Hadley Arcus, a natural law philosopher, he says that if abortion is a natural right, then the abortion advocate had that right from the moment she began to exist, the moment of conception. So according to the logic of abortion advocates, we're left with an amusing paradox. Unborn women do not have a right to life, but they do have a right to an abortion. Ridiculous, right? Because how could human rights exist where the right to life doesn't? So if fundamental rights and natural rights flow from our humanity, and we have them from the moment we begin to exist, then unborn women would have a fundamental right to an abortion, right? So that might be have you considered that if you say women have a fundamental right to an abortion, Seth, that would include unborn women? That might be a next question to ask, right? And then I might go, well, oh, wow, that's a really good question. Well, it's not a human. So maybe it's biologically a female. Maybe it has the chromosomes, but it's not a person, right? And so these debates and these questions will literally go like this all day. They'll go in these vicious circles. You'll make a really good point, and the pro-choicer will deny it's a human with rights. So you can always continue to go back to what do you mean by that to get more information. That's always a good thing. And then that takes the pressure off you. You don't have to feel like you're in the hot seat, like, I need a response. The point of these 3 questions is to make you feel like you don't always have to have a response. It's just to ask good questions. But this debate has become so politicized and polarized that it's kind of seared our consciences sometimes. And we're just like, what do I say? But that's the point of this lecture tonight. That's the point of these questions, is to say they're go-to questions so you don't have to feel like you have to prove the other person wrong or make your pro-life point. You merely have to ask, what do you mean by every word that you say? Because the pro-choicer will mean something different by almost every word that they say. When they say equality, they're thinking abortion. We're thinking pro-life. When they say women's rights, we're thinking the unborn women's rights. They're thinking poisoning unborn women. Almost every word they say will have a different definition. So you can always ask, what do you mean by that, right? And then whatever I tell you to make my case, you can just always ask, why do you believe that? Why do you believe that for women to be equal to men, they have to have the right to kill their own children, right? Now, maybe if you asked me that, I would say, it's not a child. Don't call them unborn children. But then you can just go back to the science. Have you considered that according to the science of embryology, it actually tells us that the unborn child is a distinct, living, and whole human being, right? So that would be, I guess, how you can kind of always go back to this mental scaffolding of the pro-life position, is by going back to the question, what is the unborn? Why? Because almost every pro-choice argument will assume what about the unborn? They're not a person. But I've never proved it, right? I was hanging out with the students here at the high school yesterday, and I asked one of them, have you stopped beating your brother yet? Now notice, if she says yes, she's admitting that she used to beat her brother. But if she says no, she's saying she still does. So what have I assumed? That she beats her brother. But what am I trying to prove? That she beats her brother. Almost every argument for abortion will do that within the course of its rhetoric. It will assume the unborn is human, and it will never make a case for the non-personhood or non-value of the unborn child. So whatever your pro-choice friend says in a conversation, always look for that assumption. The assumption that they're not granting full personhood to the child, but they made the claim, so they bear the burden of proof. And then let yourself relax. Let yourself relax and just remember and memorize those 3 questions, and don't feel like you have a spiritual obligation from the Holy Spirit to change that person's mind right then. It's probably not going to happen. As Greg Kokel often says, our role as ambassadors for Christ is to put a stone in their shoe. What happens when a stone gets in your shoe? It's freaking annoying, right? And then you're stepping on it all day. And the hope is that through that action, at some point in their life, they'll go, maybe I should take it out, right? Maybe when reality slaps you in the face, you should turn the other cheek and go, wow, thank you. Eventually, they'll reassert to reality. So, does that help?
It does.
And so I said that because I could tell that you were kind of like, what do I say to him? But that's what the questions are for. It's to tell you, you don't always have to say something or make your own case. You humanize the other person by asking questions. Then you ask them, why do you believe that? And most of the time, pro-choicers don't know why they believe what they believe. and they'll run around and around and around in the same circle with the same verbiage and the same arguments. But they can't actually give you a case as to why. So you just keep asking. Why do you believe that? How is it that for women to be equal, they have to have the right to kill unborn children? And then have you considered, and then you can fill in your pro-life belief. Or you can say, if you've identified a flaw in their reasoning, you can say, if we applied that belief to toddlers or teenagers or old people, we could justify killing them too. And that's where you then can make your case. But now they're going to listen to you because what did you do with them for 10 minutes?
Ask them the right question.
Listen to them and let them talk, right? So give them a round of applause.
I actually had a question for you before I left.
Yes, go for it.
I remember you saying an argument for a pro-choicer would say something like, this unborn child, this tiny embryo has, they're not aware of themselves and they have no desire to live. So I wanted to ask you, in your character, do you think that an unborn embryo, no matter how small it is, has no desire to live?
Yeah, and unborn children don't have any desires, right? They don't even know they exist. Mm-hmm. They have no desires, and so therefore they don't have a right to life.
Right. I don't know, how old are you?
29.
29. Do 29-year-old grown men have a right to live?
Yeah, I have a right to life because I'm born, and our laws say that you're not a person until you're born.
Right. But did you consider the 29-year-old men all across the world who have no desire to live and want to kill themselves because of depression or because of other struggles that are going on? Does that mean that they don't have a right to life because they still are sad?
Well, no, see, that's different. So good job. Very well done. Good job. Give him a round of applause. And so, yeah, that's exactly right. And so that's the application of the third question. And I could have gone and I could have been mean to him and I could have tried to push him more. But what he did was exactly right? That's what you would want to say, right? What if a guy broke up with his girlfriend or she broke up with him and he's mentally distressed and he wants to kill himself and he has no desire to go on living? Have we not violated his rights if we kill him? Because he doesn't have desires and rights come from desires. No, of course not, right? The desire to go on living doesn't occur until months after birth. Does that mean we can kill infants because we haven't violated their desires? Of course not, right? Reductio ad absurdum. Have you considered the implications of your view? So really good job. Awesome. I want to close with this before we go to intermission, and I just want to answer this question. What is our duty, very briefly? Our duty as followers of Jesus is to love our neighbor, right? The greatest commandments in Scripture, Christ says, is all the law and the prophets hang on to. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. So if every human being is created in the image of God and the unborn child is a human being, then the unborn child is our neighbor, right? So we have a spiritual obligation to love them. And how do we love a neighbor that a country said it is legal to kill through all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason or no reason at all? There are many ways to love that neighbor. That's why there's many different types of pro-life organizations and pregnancy resource centers. But the first and most important way to love a neighbor that it's legal to kill is to stop the killing, is to stop the slaughter. And the way that we do that is through our political voice. We use our political voice to restore personhood to our preborn image bearers to protect them from dismemberment. And politically speaking, there's only one option for the pro-life Christian who wants to use their political voice to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, Proverbs 31:8, and hold back those staggering towards slaughter, Proverbs 24:11. That doesn't mean that political parties are somehow manifestations of Christ. It doesn't mean that the Republican Party is without flaws. It just means that there's only one political party reasonably situated to provide protections for the preborn and restore their legal protections. But sometimes it's costly to love our neighbors, isn't it? That's why the lawyer in the parable of the Good Samaritan told Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" He didn't want to count the cost for loving neighbors that he didn't view as neighbors. And it might be costly for you to love your unborn neighbors. It might be costly because it's not always popular. And particularly if you're younger, it will be very unpopular to be vocal about your pro-life beliefs. It might also be costly because it will take time to master the pro-life view, right? You're not going to remember everything I said this evening. So take time to master the pro-life view so that you have those tools constantly at your call. You can subscribe to my podcast, Unaborted with Seth Gruber. There's an episode once a week, and it's for you. It's to equip people to engage on the battlefield of abortion. Follow me on social media, or you can go to my website for more blog postings on this topic. Proverbs 31:8 says to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. While that is the unborn child, friends, did you know it's also us? Remember, apart from Christ's sacrifice on our behalf, we are also those who cannot speak up for themselves. We cannot vouch for our own righteousness. No one can stand before Christ on the day of judgment and say, Lord, perfect record, baby. Open up the gates of glory. Not one of us can speak for ourselves. But what does 1 John 2:1 say? My little children, I am writing this to you so that you will not sin. But if anybody does sin, we have an advocate, Jesus Christ, the one who is truly righteous, who pleads our case before the Father. What's an advocate? Someone who speaks up for someone else. So if Christ spoke up for us when we were utterly incapable of doing so, how can we not speak up for the unborn children in our midst who are also unable to speak up for themselves? We seek to save unborn children from death and love them and their mothers and fathers, not to gain God's approval or love. We do it because we already have God's love. We do it because we have been clutched out of the fires of hell. We have been saved. Someone spoke up for us. What does Christ say? Love as I have loved. That's why we do what we do. So I want you to hear the final words of Jesus from the parable of the Good Samaritan. Remember? 2 pastors walk by a bleeding dude on a road and do nothing, but the bleeding victim's natural enemy loves him and saves his life. Rather than picturing the bleeding victim on that road, I want you to picture the unborn bleeding victim, who is the greatest bleeding victim in America today because they're killed at the tune of 1 million a year. Picture that victim. And I want you to hear Jesus' words to you today on this issue. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers or to the bleeding victim? And he said to Jesus, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. Thank you, friends. Have a good intermission. We'll be back in a little bit.
If you want to come down here. That was great. Let's give Seth one more round of applause. All right, so before I break you off to go have snacks and water and do all that, we have some goodies for you. Last year, we had our Babies Lives Matter shirts, and we threw a bunch of those out. And this year, we have our Love Saves Lives shirts. So we have 6 of them that we're just gonna throw out. If you get one and you don't, the size doesn't fit, you can go to our first choice table out there and exchange it for a different size. So girls, if you wanna just throw those out, don't hit anyone in the face, although they are soft. Does anyone want one? What? All right, while they're throwing those out, you can go out to the hub. There are snacks, coffee, and water. And also in the hub are our vendors. So we have First Choice out there, First Choice Pregnancy Center right here in Waterville. We have First Step Pregnancy Center that's out of Bangor, Maine. And we have Safe Families, and we have Maine Right to Life, and we have Building Healthy Futures. So come back in 15 minutes. Also, our text number, if you have any questions, which I saw a lot of you taking a lot of notes, so I know that there's gonna be some questions. Please use our text number. It is 466-0025. And you can see someone who has one of these shirts on and probably a volunteer name tag. They can tell you that number again if you don't see it up there. So go ahead. Come back in 15 minutes, and we'll have question and answer time with Seth. Thank you.